The sun hung low over the sleepy village of Nazareth, casting long shadows across dusty streets where children played and neighbors chatted, unaware that among them walked a child unlike any other. He was only 5 years old, yet there was something about him, a silent power that radiated from his small frame, an ancient wisdom hidden behind innocent eyes. This was Jesus, the carpenter's son, whose childhood would be marked not by the ordinary but by the extraordinary.
Exciting news. Before we get into today's video, I've got an amazing opportunity for you. Have you ever wanted to learn Hebrew? Now's your chance. We're offering a unique beginner Hebrew class, and the best part? You set your own budget. That's right, you decide how much you want to invest in your Hebrew learning journey, and we'll review your registration to make it work for you. To get you started, we're offering 3 free introductory classes. No commitments, just a fantastic opportunity to see how enjoyable and rewarding learning Hebrew can be.
Very good, Barak. If you find the beginning of a verb, of a shoresh, one of our 3...
So why wait? Dive into Hebrew today and explore a rich new language and culture. Click the link in the description to sign up now and start your Hebrew journey. All right, let's get back to the video.
The Infancy Gospel of Thomas pulls back the curtain on these early, mysterious years of Jesus' life, revealing a boy who could shape clay into living creatures, heal the sick with a touch, and summon storms with a whisper. But with these powers came challenges, moments of wonder, fear, and even wrath. This was no ordinary child's tale. It was the story of a young Messiah grappling with his divine nature in a world that was not yet ready to understand him. As we delve into these ancient stories, imagine the quiet streets of Nazareth where whispers followed the boy with powers beyond comprehension. Picture the faces of those who witnessed his miracles, some in awe, others in fear, and journey with us through the miraculous and mysterious childhood of Jesus, as told in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas.
The air was thick with the heat of a summer afternoon in Nazareth. The village buzzed with the usual hum of daily life, women fetching water, men tending to their work, and children playing in the dusty streets. Among these children was a boy who stood apart, not for the games he played, but for the way he seemed to command the world around him. His name was Jesus, and though his years numbered only 5, there was a power within him that defied his tender age. On this particular day, young Jesus found himself by a small stream, the cool water offering respite from the relentless sun. With delicate hands, he began to shape the wet clay on the riverbank, forming tiny birds with remarkable precision. His friends watched in curiosity, their laughter ringing out as they marveled at his skill. But for Jesus, this was no mere game. His brow furrowed in concentration. He gently placed his creations on the ground, 12 sparrows, lined up as if ready to take flight. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the peaceful moment. It was Joseph, his father, hurrying toward him with a concerned look on his face.
Jesus,
He called out, his voice firm yet gentle.
it is the Sabbath. You should not be doing this kind of work.
The other children fell silent, their eyes wide as they looked from Joseph to Jesus. The weight of the Sabbath law was something even they understood. But Jesus, undeterred, looked up at his Father, a glimmer of something ancient and profound in his gaze. Without a word, he clapped his hands. The sound echoed across the water, and before the onlookers could comprehend what was happening, the clay sparrows began to stir. Wings of earth and water took on life, feathers rustling as the birds lifted from the ground, soaring into the sky. Gasps of astonishment filled the air as the children, and even Joseph, watched in awe, their disbelief mingling with wonder. The sparrows flew higher and higher, disappearing into the bright blue of the afternoon sky, leaving behind a stunned silence. Joseph, struck by the sight, could only shake his head in bewilderment, his rebuke forgotten in the face of this miraculous display. The other children, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and amazement, slowly began to back away. Whispers of,
"Who is he?
and
How did he do that?"
rippling through the group. But Jesus, untroubled by their reactions, simply smiled, a knowing, serene smile that hinted at the vast power within him, a power that even he, in his innocence, was just beginning to understand. He returned to the stream as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, leaving those who had witnessed the miracle with a tale they would tell for years to come. The day the carpenter's son breathed life into clay and commanded the birds of the air with a mere clap of his hands. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows on the narrow streets of Nazareth, where children played and adults went about their daily chores. Among them was Jesus, now a bit older, but still just a child, his presence marked by an aura of mystery that set him apart from the other boys. He wandered through the village, his eyes taking in the world with a depth far beyond his years, his mind filled with thoughts too profound for any child or even any adult to fully grasp. On this particular day, as Jesus walked along the dusty road, a group of boys ran past him, laughing and shouting, their joy filling the air. One of them, not noticing Jesus in his path, accidentally brushed against him with a force that nearly knocked Jesus off balance. The boy, unaware of the significance of what he had done, kept running, his laughter trailing behind him. But Jesus stopped, his small frame tense, his expression darkening. There was a silence, heavy and unsettling, that seemed to ripple out from him like a sudden chill in the warm air. The other children, sensing the change, grew quiet, their eyes turning to Jesus, who now stood completely still, staring at the boy who had bumped into him. A murmur began to spread among the onlookers, some fearful, others merely curious. Jesus' gaze was intense, filled with a power that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Without a word, he lifted his hand, and the boy who had pushed past him suddenly froze in mid-step. The laughter died in his throat as his body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Gasps of horror erupted from the children and nearby villagers who had seen what happened. They had heard of Jesus' miraculous powers, but this was something darker, something that filled their hearts with dread. The children scattered, their faces pale, as the boy's mother rushed to her fallen son, her cries of despair echoing through the street. Joseph and Mary, who had been nearby, arrived at the scene, their faces filled with concern. Joseph took Jesus aside, his voice trembling as he spoke.
My son, what have you done? But this is not the way.
But before anyone else could react, Jesus' expression softened, and the fierce light in his eyes faded. He knelt beside the boy, placing his small hand on the boy's chest. The crowd held its breath, watching in silent anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, suddenly, the boy gasped, his chest rising, as life returned to him. His eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion, as if waking from a deep sleep. The people around them watched in stunned silence, the fear that had gripped them moments before now mingling with relief and wonder. Jesus stood, his face calm, though a shadow of something heavy, perhaps regret, passed briefly across his young features. He helped the boy to his feet, his touch gentle, his eyes filled with an understanding far beyond his years. The people around them watched in stunned silence, the fear that had gripped them moments before now mingling with relief and wonder. Jesus stood, his face calm, though a shadow of something heavy, perhaps regret, passed briefly across his young features. He helped the boy to his feet, his touch gentle, his eyes filled with an understanding far beyond his years. The crowd, still shaken, began to disperse, whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some marveled at the power of the young boy, who could bring life and death with a thought, while others muttered in fear, unsure of what to make of this child, who held such terrible and wondrous abilities within him. As the people left, Joseph and Mary looked at their son, a mix of concern and love in their eyes. Jesus met their gaze, and without saying a word, they knew he was not like other children. His path was one of both great power and great responsibility, and with each passing day, he was learning what it meant to carry the weight of the divine within his human form. And so, the story of the young Messiah spread through Nazareth and beyond, a tale of miracles and wrath, of life and death, and of a child who was destined to change the world, even as he struggled to understand the full extent of his own power. The village of Nazareth had settled into the quiet rhythms of dusk. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the rooftops and narrow streets in a warm, gentle glow. As the day began to fade, the villagers prepared for the evening, their voices soft and subdued. Among them, Jesus moved with a calm and quiet presence, his heart attuned to the needs of those around him, his eyes always watchful for those who were suffering. Despite the miracles he had performed and the power he had shown, there were still those who feared him, who whispered behind closed doors of the boy who could bring life and death with a single word. One such neighbor, an older man with a face lined by years of worry, had seen what Jesus had done to the boy who had bumped into him. The memory of that day haunted him, and he had kept his distance from the young child who seemed to wield divine power with such ease. But fate has a way of crossing paths, and one evening, the man's young son, a boy no older than 7, fell gravely ill. His fever burned high, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The man and his wife did everything they could to soothe the boy's suffering. But as the night deepened, the child's condition only worsened. Desperate, the man's thoughts turned to Jesus, the boy who had once struck another child down and brought him back to life. Could the same hands that had taken life also restore it? His heart pounded with fear and hope as he made his way to where Jesus was known to spend his evenings, often by the village well, where he would sit quietly, lost in thought. As the man approached, he saw Jesus, his small frame bathed in the last light of the setting sun. The man hesitated, doubt gnawing at him, but his son's labored breathing echoed in his mind, pushing him forward.
Jesus,
The man called out, his voice trembling. The boy looked up, his eyes clear and calm, meeting the man's gaze with a kindness that the man had not expected.
My son, he is dying. Please, I beg of you, help him.
For a moment, Jesus was silent, as if he were listening to something beyond the man's words, something deep within his heart. Then, without hesitation, he stood and began to walk toward the man's house. The man hurried beside him, his fear slowly giving way to a fragile hope. They arrived at the house where the man's wife sat beside their son, her tears glistening in the dim light. The boy lay motionless, his face pale, his breaths shallow. The mother looked up as Jesus entered, her eyes wide with both fear and faith. Jesus moved to the boy's side and placed his small hand on the child's forehead. The room grew still, the air thick with the weight of expectation. Jesus closed his eyes, and a deep calm seemed to settle over the house, a peace that the man had not felt in days. Moments passed, each one stretching into eternity, and then, as if drawn by a hidden force, the boy's eyes fluttered open. The fever that had gripped him so fiercely began to break, and his breathing steadied, becoming smooth and even. Color returned to his cheeks, and a small, weak smile played on his lips as he looked up at his parents. Tears of joy and relief filled the mother's eyes as she embraced her son, whispering words of gratitude. The man, overcome with emotion, fell to his knees before Jesus.
thank you.
He whispered, his voice choked with tears.
I doubted you. I feared you. But you have saved my son.
Jesus reached out and gently lifted the man to his feet. His eyes, so often filled with a mysterious depth, now shone with a simple, profound love.
There is no need to fear.
He said softly, his voice carrying the wisdom of one far beyond his years.
Love heals all wounds.
With that, Jesus turned to leave. His work done, the family watched him go, their hearts forever changed by the compassion and power they had witnessed. The story of the healing spread quickly through Nazareth, and with it, the image of Jesus as not just a child of great power, but as a source of boundless love and mercy. From that day on, those who had feared him began to see him in a new light, not just as the boy who could command life and death, but as the young Messiah whose heart was as tender as it was powerful, a child whose destiny was to bring healing and hope to a world in desperate need of both. The early morning sun had just begun to peek over the hills surrounding Nazareth, casting a soft glow on the small village as it stirred to life. In a humble home, Mary watched as Jesus, now a boy of 7, prepared for his first day of formal schooling. Despite his tender age, there was something undeniably different about Jesus, something that made her heart swell with both pride and a touch of unease. She knew, as did Joseph, that their son was not like the other children in Nazareth, but today he would enter a new world, one where his wisdom would soon reveal itself in ways no one could have anticipated. The schoolhouse was a simple building, filled with the excited chatter of children eager to learn. The teacher, an elderly man known for his patience and knowledge, stood at the front of the room, his eyes twinkling with kindness as he welcomed the new students. Among them, Jesus took his place, his demeanor calm and poised, unlike the other children who fidgeted with nervous energy. The teacher began the day's lesson by introducing the alphabet, a fundamental building block of their education. He wrote the first letter, Alpha, on a wax tablet and held it up for the class to see.
This is Alpha.
The teacher said, his voice gentle and instructive.
Repeat after me, Alpha.
The children obediently echoed the letter's name, their voices in unison. But when the teacher's eyes fell on Jesus, he noticed the boy was silent, his gaze focused intently on the letter, as if seeing something far beyond its simple shape. The teacher, curious and slightly puzzled, approached Jesus.
Jesus,
the teacher said kindly.
Can you say Alpha?
Jesus looked up at the teacher, his eyes deep with an understanding that caught the old man off guard.
Tell me, teacher.
Jesus began, his voice clear and steady.
Do you understand the meaning of Alpha? Do you know why it is the first letter and what it represents?
The room fell silent. The other children turned to stare at Jesus, their young faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue. The teacher, taken aback by the question, hesitated before answering.
Alpha is the first letter of the alphabet,
he replied cautiously.
It is the beginning.
Jesus nodded, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips, a smile that spoke of knowledge far beyond his years.
Alpha is the beginning, yes,
he said, his voice soft but filled with authority.
But it is also much more. It is the symbol of creation, the origin of all things. And do you know what comes after Alpha?
The teacher, now deeply intrigued by this unusual exchange, shook his head slightly, as if uncertain of where this conversation was leading.
Please tell us, Jesus.
After Alpha comes Omega,
Jesus continued, his voice resonating with a wisdom that seemed to fill the room.
Alpha and Omega are the first and the last, the beginning and the end. They are not just letters, they are symbols of the eternal nature of God, who was, and is to come. The Alpha is the creation of the world, and the Omega is its fulfillment, the completion of all things.
A hush fell over the room as Jesus spoke, his words weaving through the air like a sacred melody. The teacher, normally so confident in his knowledge, stood speechless before the child who had just imparted a truth so profound. It left him feeling as though he were standing in the presence of something divine. The other children, too young to fully grasp the depth of Jesus' words, nevertheless felt the weight of what had just occurred. They whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. Who was this boy who spoke with such authority, who seemed to know the mysteries of the universe as easily as he knew the letters of the alphabet? The teacher, finally finding his voice, bowed his head slightly in respect.
You are wise beyond your years, Jesus,
he said softly.
There is much I can teach, but there is also much I can learn from you.
Jesus smiled, a serene and knowing smile that seemed to light up the room.
We are all students and teachers,
he replied.
For wisdom is a gift that grows as it is shared.
From that day forward, the schoolhouse was never the same. Word of Jesus' divine knowledge spread quickly through Nazareth, and the children began to look at him with a newfound respect, no longer seeing him as just another boy, but as someone extraordinary, someone touched by the hand of God. The teacher, too, found himself humbled, recognizing in Jesus a wisdom that far surpassed his own. He continued to teach, but always with an open heart and mind, knowing that in this young boy he had encountered a depth of understanding that could only come from the divine. And so, Jesus grew, his knowledge expanding like a river fed by countless streams, each lesson a step closer to the destiny that awaited him. In the simple schoolhouse of Nazareth, a glimpse of his true nature had been revealed, and those who were there would never forget the day when the young Jesus spoke of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, and showed them all that he was both a child and something infinitely more. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village of Nazareth as evening settled in. The villagers, finishing their day's work, gathered in small groups, exchanging stories and news. Among the tales that wove through their conversations were those of a remarkable child, a boy named Jesus, whose presence had already begun to ripple through their lives in ways they could scarcely comprehend. In the quiet of their home, Mary and Joseph sat together, reflecting on the extraordinary events that had unfolded since Jesus' birth. From the moment he had entered the world, there had been signs, angels, shepherds, wise men from the east, but nothing had prepared them for the reality of raising a child who was both fully human and fully divine. Mary's thoughts drifted to the miracles she had witnessed, the birds brought to life with a clap of his hands, the healing touch that restored life to the sick and dying, and the profound wisdom that seemed to flow from him as naturally as breathing. She remembered the awe and fear in the eyes of their neighbors, the way the village had begun to change in response to her son's presence. Yet, with all the wonders and miracles, there was also a quiet, deep-seated understanding within Mary that Jesus was on a path that she could not fully fathom. His childhood, though marked by divine power, was only the beginning of a journey that would lead him far beyond the hills of Nazareth, into a world that awaited his message of love, healing, and redemption. As the evening deepened, Mary watched Jesus from the doorway, seeing him sitting alone under a fig tree in the courtyard. The soft glow of twilight surrounded him, his face serene, lost in thoughts that seemed too vast for such a young child. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above him, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. In that stillness, Mary felt a pang of sorrow mingled with pride. She knew that the time would come when Jesus would leave their home, when his life would no longer be hers to shelter. The knowledge was both comforting and heartbreaking. A mother's love intertwined with the weight of the divine mission he was born to fulfill. Joseph, sensing her thoughts, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder.
He is destined for great things.
Joseph said softly, his voice steady with faith.
We must trust in God's plan even when we cannot see the path ahead.
Mary nodded, her heart swelling with both love and acceptance.
I know.
She whispered, her eyes never leaving Jesus.
But he is still my son, and I will always worry for him.
Under the fig tree, Jesus lifted his head, as if aware of his mother's gaze. He smiled at her, a smile filled with a deep, abiding love that seemed to say everything without words. Mary's heart ached with the intensity of that smile, the pure, unfiltered connection between mother and child, between the human and the divine. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Mary and Joseph retreated inside, leaving Jesus alone with the night. They knew that his future was beyond their control, that the stories of his childhood, recorded and passed down through the generations, were but glimpses of a greater story yet to be told, a story of sacrifice, salvation, and eternal love. The tales from the Infancy Gospel of Thomas spread far beyond Nazareth, carried by travelers and storytellers, each one adding their voice to the growing legend of the boy who was both man and God. These stories, sometimes fantastical, sometimes poignant, were told and retold, weaving together a picture of a childhood unlike any other. But even as the stories grew, the essence of the young Jesus remained the same, a child of miraculous power and divine wisdom, who walked among men and showed them glimpses of the infinite. His life, from its earliest days, was a testament to the mystery of the Incarnation, a mystery that would unfold fully in the years to come. As the boy from Nazareth grew into the man who would change the course of history. And so, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas leaves us with a vision of Jesus as a child, a being of both wonder and grace, whose early years were a prelude to the greater story of redemption that was yet to be written. It reminds us that even in his youth, Jesus was already beginning to reveal the depths of his divine nature, a nature that would one day offer salvation to all mankind.